Some stories don't end when the sun comes up. These three terrifying accounts were shared by people who lived through something they can't explain or escape. What happened to them could happen to anyone, maybe even you. If you are new to this channel and enjoy scary true stories like these, please help this channel grow by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscription helps us bring you more real horror stories that keep you up at night. Don't just listen, be part of the darkness. Thank you for your support. I used to live in a fairly quiet neighborhood in a small town in northern Oregon. It wasn't exactly rural, but it wasn't busy suburban life either. Just that in-between kind of area where you'd recognize the same few cars driving by and know your neighbors by name. I rented a 2-bedroom place on the end of a cul-de-sac. Nothing fancy. It had a little back patio, a fenced-in yard, and just enough space for me and my dog Harley. I'm usually someone who keeps a low profile. I don't post much online. I work from home, and outside of walking Harley or the occasional grocery trip, I don't really go out much. So I figured the chances of anything unusual happening to me were pretty slim. But last fall, something happened that completely changed the way I see safety in my own home, and in people in general. It started with the fence. One morning, I noticed one of the slats on the back fence was broken, snapped clean through, like something or someone had forced their way in. At first, I assumed it was Harley. She's strong and likes to run the fence line barking at squirrels, so maybe she'd hit it wrong. I fixed it, didn't think much of it. But over the next week, I noticed more subtle things being slightly out of place. A small shovel I'd left leaning against the shed was now on the ground, halfway across the yard. A potted plant was shifted 2 feet over, with a clean handprint smudged into the dirt. Once, the back gate was unlatched, even though I always lock it out of habit. I chalked it all up to forgetfulness or weather, until one night around 2 a.m. Harley started barking like she was in full protection mode. Her hackles were up, and she wouldn't go near the back door, just stood there growling with this low rumble in her chest that I'd never heard before. When I turned on the porch light and looked through the blinds, I didn't see anything, but I felt something. I can't explain it, just this thick heaviness, like someone was watching. I let her out to do her thing, but she wouldn't go into the yard, just stayed pressed against my leg. That was the first night I started keeping the porch light on all night. 2 days later, I found boot prints in the dirt outside the fence, deep ones, too big to be mine. I don't know how long they'd been there. I remember staring at them for a long time, trying to convince myself maybe it was just a delivery guy or utility worker, but the fence had been repaired since then. There was no reason for anyone to be that close. I started sleeping with the bedroom door locked after that. Not that it would have done much if someone really wanted to get in, but it made me feel better for a while. Then things escalated. One night, I was working late on a project in my home office. It was almost midnight. I had headphones on, and the only light on was my desk lamp. Harley was curled up in her bed by the door. At some point, I thought I heard something, just a soft knock or tap, like fingernails on glass. I paused the music and looked around. Nothing. I walked through the house quietly. Everything seemed normal. Harley hadn't even flinched, so I figured maybe I imagined it. But the next morning, when I opened the curtains in the guest bedroom that I never use, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a small circular smear on the inside of the window, about eye level, like someone had pressed their face, or maybe their mouth against the glass, from the inside. That room had been shut for weeks. I kept the door closed, and didn't go in there for anything. I don't even have guests. I checked the window latch. It was unlocked. That's when I realized whoever had been in my yard had been in my house. I felt physically sick, I searched the entire place, top to bottom, every cabinet, closet, under every bed. I didn't find anyone, but that somehow made it worse. I couldn't figure out when they could have gotten in. I checked the doors obsessively for the next few days, bought extra locks, installed security cameras, got new blinds for every window. My house started to feel like a prison, but it still didn't feel safe. Then came the pictures. One morning, I found an envelope wedged into my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just my name in shaky handwriting. Inside were 3 photos, printed on regular paper. The first was of me walking Harley down the sidewalk outside my house. The second was me in my kitchen, cooking something. The third was me asleep in bed. The angle looked like it was taken from my bedroom door. I froze. I remember my hands trembling so hard the photos fluttered to the floor. I didn't even realize I was crying until Harley came over and started whining. I called the police immediately, and to their credit, they took it seriously. They looked at the photos, reviewed the footage from my security cameras, but nothing. Whoever this was, they knew where my blind spots were. None of the cameras caught anything useful, just static shadows and shifting trees. They offered to have an officer drive by more often. That was it. Nothing they could do without proof someone had actually broken in. A week passed, then another. I tried to move on, tried to act normal, but the fear never left. I barely slept. I kept lights on in every room. I even started locking my bedroom door again. Then one night, I'll never forget it, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of my closet door creaking open. At first I thought I was dreaming. I stared into the dark, heart racing, straining to hear more. Harley wasn't in the room. I called for her softly. No answer. Then I heard a breath. Not mine. I reached for my phone, slowly, trying not to make noise. I flicked on the flashlight, and in that split second of illumination, I saw him. A man crouched in the corner of my closet, half shielded by hanging clothes. His eyes reflected the light like an animal's, wide and gleaming. His face was pale, dirty, and completely expressionless, like he didn't even register that he'd been caught. I screamed, bolted out of the room, and slammed the door behind me, grabbed Harley from the hallway, and ran out of the house barefoot. I didn't stop running until I was in my neighbor's yard, pounding on their door like a maniac. The police came again. They searched every inch of my house. The man was gone. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry, but they found something else. A hole in the wall behind the closet, small, maybe just big enough for someone to squeeze through. It led into the crawl space under the house, and inside that space, they found evidence that someone had been living there. Food wrappers, empty water bottles, a sleeping bag, even more photos. They never found him. I moved out 2 weeks later. I don't care about breaking the lease or losing my deposit. I don't even go outside without Harley anymore. I sleep with a bat next to the bed. I have cameras inside and out, and I still wake up sometimes in a cold sweat, convinced I hear breathing from the closet. I don't know who he was, or how long he was in there, but the worst part is knowing he watched me, ate while I ate, slept while I slept, close enough to touch me, and I never even knew. And somewhere out there, he still knows where I live. He still knows my name. I used to work for a wildlife conservation program out in the Pacific Northwest, mostly remote trail and forest monitoring. It wasn't uncommon for me to spend several days at a time camping out deep in the wilderness, cataloging animal tracks, checking camera traps, and updating maps. I always worked alone. It was part of the job I actually enjoyed, being completely off-grid, surrounded by trees, and disconnected from all the noise. I thought I was used to it. I thought nothing could shake me. But something happened a couple of years ago that still unsettles me in a way I can't explain. This was in early September. The air was starting to get cooler at night, and most tourists and casual hikers had stopped coming out, which meant I could cover more ground with fewer interruptions. My assignment was to head into a less traveled area of national forest, an old trail that had been partially closed off years back due to rockfall, but the upper portion still gave access to a valley that was prime for elk movement in the fall. My plan was to hike up early in the morning, check 3 cameras, stay overnight, and then loop back down through the ridgeline. It was a long day of hiking, but uneventful. I passed no one. The trail was overgrown and full of debris, but I made it to the site by late afternoon. There was a clearing at the edge of the valley where a large fallen cedar made a perfect bench for cooking and sitting. I set up my small tent, made dinner, and logged my data from the day into my notebook. Around dusk, I heard some movement in the distance, cracking branches, like something large walking through the trees. I assumed it was elk, or maybe a black bear. I made some noise to let whatever it was know I was there, and the sounds moved away. That night, I stayed up late, watching the stars, and enjoying the kind of silence you only get when you're miles away from civilization. At some point, I heard what I thought was a voice, faint, far off, maybe half a whisper on the wind. I paused, listening closely, but nothing else came. I figured it had to be my imagination, or the wind playing tricks through the trees. Still, I decided to douse the fire and go inside the tent. I woke up a few hours later to a sound I couldn't quite place at first. It wasn't an animal noise. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Footsteps. Someone or something was walking just outside my tent, slow and steady. My heart started pounding. I reached for my flashlight and unzipped the flap as quietly as I could, shining the beam toward the sound. Nothing, just the foggy darkness of early morning. I waited, barely breathing, but the footsteps had stopped. At dawn, I did a sweep of the area, expecting to find tracks or maybe signs of animals, but the ground was damp from a light overnight rain, and there were no prints at all. Nothing. That's what started to bother me. The sound had been so clear, so real, but I had no evidence to prove it happened. I spent the day checking the last camera traps. It kept nagging at me, like something had passed through during the night that didn't want to be seen. I decided not to stay another night, even though that had been the plan. I packed up and started heading back down the trail in the late afternoon. About halfway back, I came across something that made me stop. Right in the center of the trail, there was a small pile of rocks, stacked intentionally, maybe 5 or 6 stones high. They hadn't been there the day before. It wasn't unusual for hikers to mark trails that way, but this wasn't a place people came anymore, and it looked fresh. I walked around it and kept moving. A little further down, I found another, then another, 3 in total, evenly spaced out like breadcrumbs. I stopped at the third one and looked around, trying to see if someone was nearby. I even called out. Nothing. I don't know what came over me, but a wave of unease hit me then. I picked up my pace. I made it back to my vehicle around nightfall. It was parked on a gravel pull-off, a few miles from the main road. When I opened the back to throw my pack in, I noticed something else that made my stomach drop. My spare water container, the one I always leave in the back, had been moved. It wasn't where I had left it, not just shifted during the drive. It was unscrewed, the cap was missing, and the container was nearly empty. There were no animals around that could have done that. Someone had been inside my vehicle. I looked over the rest of my gear. My emergency radio was gone too, but I knew I hadn't used it. I hadn't even taken it out. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking back to the footsteps, the voice, the rock stacks, the missing gear. It all felt like pieces of something I couldn't see the full shape of. I reported the incident, of course. My supervisor chalked it up to some weird transient or off-grid hiker playing tricks, maybe someone mentally unstable. The Park Service sent out a ranger the next day to sweep the area, but they found nothing. About a month later, I was back at headquarters reviewing camera footage from several sites. We often capture days' worth of images and sort through them during downtime. So one of the cameras I'd checked on that trip, the one in the upper valley, had a set of images that froze me in my seat. They started normal: elk, deer, a fox. Then around 2 in the morning, there was a single frame that stood out. A man, thin, with long hair, standing just at the edge of the tree line. He was facing the camera, but his head was slightly turned. He looked like he was listening to something. His clothes looked ragged, no backpack, just standing there. The next few images, empty. Then hours later, another of him. This time he was closer, kneeling down, as if arranging something on the ground. That was the night I heard the footsteps. That was the night I left early. I never went back to that part of the forest. I transferred to a new region the next season, closer to the coast. Every now and then, I still think about that guy, if he was even a person at all. Sometimes I wonder if he'd been watching me that whole trip, hiding just out of sight, moving when I moved, listening when I spoke. The way he looked in that photo, it still haunts me. He didn't look like someone who was lost. It looked like someone who'd been there a long time, too long. And sometimes, late at night, when I camp alone in quieter areas, I still wake up to the sound of footsteps just outside my tent. It started last fall, when I moved into a small rental house just outside the city limits. It was one of those older, narrow homes with creaky wooden floors and tall, drafty windows. I chose it because I needed a quiet place, and it was cheap. It also had a kind of charm that appealed to me. Ornate door frames, a big clawfoot tub, even a fireplace that I was sure I'd never use but liked the idea of having. The first few weeks were uneventful. I worked from home most days, so I got into a good rhythm. Mornings were spent on video calls and spreadsheets, evenings with a book or a show. I didn't have many friends in the area, so I rarely had visitors. That made what started happening next feel all the more strange. The first thing I noticed was the back door. I always kept it locked. It led out to a small porch, and then to the yard, which was enclosed by a tall weathered fence. One morning, I found it open, just slightly ajar. I chalked it up to maybe not closing it all the way. Wind maybe, but it happened again the next day. And the day after that. After the third time, I replaced the lock entirely, thinking it might be faulty. Still, I'd wake up and find it open. No signs of forced entry, no damage. I even started pushing a chair up against the doorknob before bed to see if it would move in the night. It didn't, not at first. Then one night, I heard it. It was about 3 in the morning, and I was still awake, lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, with the lights off. I heard a faint creak from the kitchen, like someone was slowly pushing the door open. I froze, listening hard. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't even convince myself to move. I just laid there, holding my breath, hoping I was imagining it. Then I heard what sounded like a soft shuffle, like bare feet on linoleum. It was slow and deliberate, like whoever it was didn't want to make noise, but wasn't being too careful either. I couldn't see anything from where I was. My bedroom door was closed. After a long moment of silence, I reached over to the nightstand and grabbed the small pocket knife I kept there. I didn't even turn the light on. I just got up and walked slowly to the door, listening the whole time. I didn't hear anything else. I opened the door just a crack and peered down the hallway. Everything was dark. I flipped the hall light on and tiptoed to the kitchen. The back door was wide open. The chair I had wedged against it had been moved aside, not tipped over, just set aside. I stepped out onto the porch and looked around. Nothing. No footprints in the dirt. No broken fence. I even walked the perimeter with a flashlight, but didn't see anything. I should have called the police. I know that now, but at the time, I was convincing myself it had to be some freak coincidence. Maybe a neighbor messing around. Maybe some teenager who found a way over the fence and was trying to scare me. I locked the door again, pushed the chair back into place, and slept with the light on. Things got quiet after that. For a few days, the door stayed closed. Nothing out of place. I was just starting to relax when the next thing happened. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in a meeting on Zoom. I had my headphones in and was taking notes when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. My office window, which looked out onto the side yard, had a reflection in it. At first I thought it was just the glare from my monitor, but as I looked closer, I realized it looked like the shape of someone's head, like someone was standing just outside the window, watching me. I yanked the headphones off and spun around, but there was no one there. I ran outside immediately, but again, nothing, no one. I checked the fence, which was still closed and locked. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Over the next week, it escalated. I'd hear tapping at the windows at night. Always just a single tap. I could never catch it happening, though I'd turn on the light and look, but there was never anyone there. I set up an old baby monitor camera I found at a thrift store to watch the kitchen and back door, just to see if I could catch anything. One night, while reviewing the footage, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Around 2:46 a.m., the back door began to move. Slowly, the lock didn't turn. There was no visible force, but the door just opened. Then the screen glitched for a second. When it came back, the door was closed again. I replayed it over and over. It didn't make sense. I checked the actual lock and frame again. The next morning, still intact, still locked. Then came the whispering. It started one night, when I was in the shower. I had the curtain drawn, and was just standing under the hot water, when I heard a voice, very soft, almost like it was in the next room. I turned the water off, and listened, heart thudding. The voice was low, like a murmur, and I couldn't make out any words, but I swear, it sounded like it was just on the other side of the door. I flung it open and looked out. Again, nothing. I ran through the house with just a towel on, flipping on every light, yelling out to whoever might be there. Silence. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with a kitchen knife in one hand and a flashlight in the other, waiting for something else to happen. Around 4:30, I finally dozed off. When I woke up, all the kitchen cabinets were open, every single one. The drawers too. The fridge door was ajar. I hadn't heard a thing. That's when I left. I packed a bag and drove to my brother's place across town. I didn't even tell him the full reason why. Just said I needed a break from the house. He let me stay a few nights. During that time, I arranged to break my lease, paid the penalty, and everything. I couldn't go back there. On my final trip to get the rest of my things, I brought a friend with me, just for peace of mind. We were boxing up books in the living room, when he stopped and looked at the wall next to the fireplace. He pointed to what looked like a faint outline in the paint, like a small door had once been there, and was covered over. Curious. We tapped at it. Hollow. He got a screwdriver from his car, and started prying at the edges. Eventually we pulled off the panel. Behind it was a shallow cavity in the wall. Inside was a small dusty box. I opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all of the same woman, taken at different times and locations, but always from a distance, through windows, behind trees, across streets. One of the last photos was taken from behind someone, a silhouette looking through the window of my office. I was in the photo, at my desk. It had been taken while I was working. I turned to my friend, horrified. He just said, "You need to get out of here. Right now." I never found out who took the pictures. I handed the box over to the police, filed a report, and that was that. They never followed up. The house was relisted for rent. A few weeks later, I still have nightmares sometimes. Not about what I saw, but what I didn't see. What I never heard, and how close someone must have been, watching, waiting, living in the cracks of my world, without me even knowing. And that house, it's still out there. I drive past it sometimes. And the back door, it's always open.